This hearing is called to order. I want to welcome everyone to the Military Personnel Subcommittee's hearing on the current and future state of the military personnel enterprise as we continue to build the fiscal year 2019 NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act. Our panel of the service personnel chiefs is here to address each of the service's personnel requirements, including personnel policies for recruiting and retention, family programs, and to address other budget and legislative requests for fiscal year 2019. Today's focus is on the request for manpower increases from the armed services and the requirements that went into building the specific increases, as well as how the personnel policies currently in place will support and sustain these increases. With a difficult recruiting and retention environment driven by a lessened overall propensity to serve, reduced pool of qualified candidates, and a robust economy, the competition for recruits will be difficult, and you will be competing for the same pool. As you reference in your written testimony, General Seamands, did I say that right? Okay. Today, only 1 in 4 17 to 24-year-olds in the United States is eligible to serve in the Army, and only 1 in 8 has a propensity to enlist in the military, making Army accessions a challenging and resource-intensive activity. The subcommittee also remains concerned about the ability of all the services to maintain their high-quality standards and still meet their recruiting goals. Also, I'm especially interested in your plans for retention of the right service members that are central to your mission, and specifically what additional steps the Air Force is taking to fully address their pilot crisis. Before I introduce our panel, let me offer Congresswoman Spear an opportunity to make any opening remarks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Actually, my comments mirror yours. The National Defense Strategy led Congress to assume there will be growth in end strength for most of the services. The fiscal year 2019 request does seek increases not just for next year, but also requests an end state for fiscal year 2023 of more than 10,000 from the current authorization levels for the Army, Navy, and Air Force. For the past 2 years, Congress has written a blank check for the Army, providing end strength increases not requested as part of the budget. We cannot continue this behavior. Whether we agree the services need an increase or not, it is important for Congress to understand what the long-term plans are so we can have informed debate and make educated decisions about our military. I'd like to understand how the services would sustain this growth pattern over the next 5 years in an era where finding quality applicants is becoming more and more difficult. Congress also must understand how increased end strength will apply to the force, fill current gaps, and increase units and capabilities. I yield back.
We will give each witness the opportunity to present his or her testimony, and each member an opportunity to question the witnesses for 5 minutes. We would also respectfully remind the witnesses to summarize to the greatest extent possible the high points of your written testimony in 5 minutes or less. Your written comments and statements will be made part of the hearing record. Let me welcome our panel. Lieutenant General Thomas Seamands, Deputy Chief of Staff, G1, United States Army, Vice Admiral Robert P. Burke, Chief of Naval Personnel, Lieutenant General Gina M. Grosso, Deputy Chief of Staff for Manpower, Personnel, and Services, United States Air Force, Lieutenant General Michael A. Rocco, Deputy Commandant for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, United States Marine Corps, General Seamands. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Kaufman, Ranking Member Spear, distinguished members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity today to appear before you on behalf of the men and women of the United States Army. I've submitted a statement for the record. I'd now like to highlight a few of the points. Manning our Army is one of the key components to readiness and vital to the Army's ability to fight and win our nation's wars. Thank you for the fiscal year 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, which authorized the Army to grow by 8,500. We also appreciate the 2-year budget deal, which will improve readiness and ensure our formations are filled in the years to come. To build a future Army, we must recruit a diverse men and women of high quality and high character. In a competitive market, as the chairman talked about, where only 1 in 4 17 to 24-year-olds is eligible to join the Army, and 1 in 8 has a propensity to enlist in the military. While the Army projects recruiting challenges in all components, maintaining the quality will continue to be our priority, and the Army will not sacrifice quality for quantity. Our recruiters across the country are doing incredible work to achieve this mission. The Army must also continue to retain the most talented soldiers and non-commissioned officers with the experience and skills necessary to meet our future needs. We project historic retention rates again this year for our NCOs. The Army leadership embraces talent management as a cornerstone for how we will retain our best officers and NCOs. The Integrated Pay and Personnel System Army, IPSA, will be the keystone in the archway of our talent management. IPSA will be a responsive system connecting all 3 components and build a marketplace for talent. We are a standards-based team in the Army, and the Army remains committed to giving all soldiers who can meet the standards of a military occupational specialty the opportunity to serve in that specialty. Last year, the Army implemented gender-neutral physical standards for initial entry training for specific jobs. The initial results are positive. We have successfully assessed and transferred more than almost 700 women into previously closed occupations of infantry, armor, and artillery. The opportunities are so popular, we plan on expanding the program this year. As part of the total force, our Army civilians are vital and comprise about 22% of our total personnel. We need a civilian workforce with unique critical skills to support our soldiers and support our families. As we build our force, we focus on the areas that provide the foundation for our future. We remain focused on personal resiliency, suicide prevention, with world-class programs for soldiers, civilians, and families, and we are aggressively working to decrease the stigma associated with seeking behavioral health help. Sexual harassment, sexual assault, and retaliation are not compatible with Army values, and they diminish our readiness. Therefore, combating all forms of sexual misconduct remain a top priority for the Army. Although we're optimistic about the progress we've made in reducing sexual violence in the ranks, we understand there's a lot more work to do as we drive towards zero. You've authorized us to grow, and we're thankful for that. We must ensure we're ready. The Army has improved personal readiness by increasing the number of deployable soldiers, and we have an ongoing review to increase the number of deployable soldiers even more in order to enhance readiness. As you're aware, the Department of Defense has issued new retention policy for non-deployable service members in February. The Army is working with OSD on the implementation of these changes. The Army will make continued reductions in our non-deployable population a priority. Because we care for our soldiers as they prepare for life after the service, the Army Soldier for Life program, with support from commanders and command sergeant majors, has resulted in increased educational and employment opportunities for our soldiers, our veterans, and our family members at a significant reduction of our unemployment cost. Additionally, I look forward to beginning the discussion of review at DOTMA to determine what's essential and what needs to be updated. Our Army is strong because of the courage, commitment of our soldiers, civilians, veterans, and family members who serve our nation. I thank all of you for your continued support to the all-volunteer Army.
Vice Admiral Burke, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Kaufman, Ranking Member Spear, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to represent the men and women in the United States Navy. Your stalwart support for them and their families continues to have a profound impact upon the health of our force today. Global demands upon the Navy continue to grow. We must continue to recruit, develop, and retain the highly skilled workforce needed to meet the growing demand signal for naval forces. Our force structure will grow as we build the Navy the nation needs, which will require increasing end strength. As we grow, our need for highly talented people increases. At the same time, propensity to serve is declining, and each of the services, as well as the civilian sector, are vying for the same limited talent pool. We are clearly in a war for talent. Current forecasts, based on leading economic indicators, suggest difficult times ahead. Labor market factors may pull sailors with critical skills into the growing civilian job market. We took note of these indicators and initiated preemptive action to retain these sailors using all available policy levers to posture ourselves to meet this anticipated growth. Despite this, we just made our FY17 end strength targets. This year's trajectory is good, but we will require steady and reliable funding going forward to stay on track. The new 2-year budget deal is great news for us and is an excellent step in that direction. While recruiters had challenges last year, an increasing FY18 recruiting mission will be even more difficult for them. Certain fields are in short supply, and our projected growth profile requires a balanced approach of accession increases as well as retention improvement. And while our overall aggregate retention remains high, nuclear field, special warfare, advanced electronics, aviation, and cyber areas demand close attention. Targeted bonuses continue to be the most cost-effective monetary tool in addressing those retention challenges, but we are aggressively applying a combination of monetary and non-monetary incentives with good effect. Toward that end, we continue to implement and expand our Sailor 2025 portfolio, which is a dynamic set of over 45 initiatives that work to provide our sailors and their families the choices, the flexibility, and transparency of processes that they expect and deserve. And we've combined that with our Manpower personnel training and education enterprise transformation efforts. And through those efforts, we will provide these programs to our sailors with a renewed focus on customer service through streamlined, efficient business processes and modern systems. We will also better meet the needs of our fleet commanders through agility, responsiveness, and the use of predictive analytics so that we can be the pillar of stability in an uncertain world. So we are moving out now with purpose and a committed sense of urgency on all of these initiatives. We also remain actively engaged in the Department's review of officer management policies and are grateful for the subcommittee's interest to examine DOTMA to ensure it meets the future needs of each of the services. I look forward to your questions, and thank you.
Thank you, Vice Admiral Burke. Lieutenant General Grosso, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Kaufman, Ranking Member Speer, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to deliver the Air Force's personnel posture for fiscal year 2019. The Air Force's #1 priority to accelerate readiness is increasing end strength. We appreciate the fiscal year 18 National Defense Authorization Act support for continued end strength growth. The growth allows the Air Force to compete, deter, and win in a more competitive and dangerous international security environment. The Air Force's FY19 President's budget continues that growth to 680,400 total force airmen, a 4,700 increase from FY18. This growth is part of our deliberate strategy to improve manning in the Air Force and includes increases in pilot production, remotely piloted aircraft operations and maintenance, and continues our manpower investment for cyber and intelligence. Additionally, the growth provides the inventory the Air Force needs to right-size our training pipeline, improve squadron readiness, and gives us a competitive advantage for airspace and cyberspace superiority. As you're aware, our most stressed operational career field is aviation. As of October 2017, our total force pilot shortage was approximately 2,000, with the largest shortage, 1,300, in our fighter pilot inventory. The FY19 President's budget continues to address the pilot shortage by funding increased pilot production capacity. In addition, this budget funds myriad programs and policies designed to address assignment, operational tempo, and quality of life issues targeted to improve pilot retention. The FY19 President's budget also increases support to airmen and families through a variety of capabilities that drive mission readiness. The budget increases child and youth funding by $54 million to a total of $114 million. This funding expands child care for those airmen needing care outside of normal duty hours, provides fees to support 4,000 children who only have access to off-base child care, and funds youth resiliency camps. The Exceptional Family Member Program assists more than 33,000 airmen who have special needs families. This budget adds 15 installation-level family support coordinators across the Air Force and also funds increasing respite care for the primary caregiver from 12 to 40 hours per child each month. Taking care of airmen and airmen's children and caregivers removes worries and distractions to allow airmen to fully focus on the mission. Interpersonal and self-directed violence are detriments to our airmen, our culture, and our core values. These acts negatively impact victims, their units, and unit readiness. We are deeply committed to the prevention of interpersonal and self-directed violence on all fronts by implementing evidence-based programs to include bystander intervention and life skills training to prevent programs and time-based self-directed violence prevention programs. Should we fall short on our goals to eliminate interpersonal and self-directed violence, we are committed to providing victims, families, and units the care they need across a robust response system. Today's threat environment requires agile and inclusive military and civilian personnel management systems to ensure the Air Force continues to retain the highly skilled talent needed to defend our nation. The enlisted force, we are conducting a triennial review of the enlisted evaluation system following the transition to a new system in 2015. Within our officer corps, we are reviewing multiple initiatives to include modifying our current promotion competitive categories and establishing technical tracks. Our civilian workforce is essential to the Air Force's mission and joint warfighting readiness. Recruiting and hiring top civilian talent is critical to our success. In FY18, we implemented a premier college intern program. This initiative enables the Air Force to recruit top talent directly from college campuses via a summer intern program, using direct hiring authorities to streamline the process. Our target for FY19 onboarding is 500 new civilians, and we currently have 415 acceptances. This approach ensures we leverage the new congressional hiring authorities and stay competitive with aggressive private sector recruiting. Finally, the Air Force is modernizing the information technology infrastructure across our human resource systems to provide exceptional personnel service to airmen and their families. In a digitally connected world, our airmen deserve the best human resource systems available today. We have a 6-year plan to migrate 115 technology platforms and 400+ applications to the cloud. As we modernize our information technology platforms, we will provide more modern systems to our airmen and enhance our ability to make data-driven decisions. In conclusion, we must ensure our airmen have the resources, training, and tools to compete, deter, and win in an increasingly complex security environment. We are committed to prioritizing and resourcing what is most important to make the Air Force more ready and lethal. We welcome the opportunity to partner with you in our endeavors to protect and defend our nation. I thank you for your continued support of your Air Force, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Grosso. Lieutenant General Rocco.
Chairman Kaufman, Ranking Member Speer, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss your Marine Corps. Marines are the foundation of the Corps and its most critical resource. Marines are recruited, trained, educated, and retained to win our nation's battles. They are smart, resilient, fit, disciplined, and able to overcome adversity. All Marines are warfighters, they are lethal, and they are ready. Recruiting and retaining high-quality men and women is my #1 priority. This year, once again, the Marine Corps will meet its recruiting mission while at the same time exceeding all quality goals. The department requires 90% of Marine recruits to be in the top education tier. We are at 99%. It requires 60% to be in the highest mental aptitude group. We are over 72%. Just as we recruit the best, so we must retain the best. These Marines must be capable of fulfilling our leadership roles and operational requirements. There is a continuous challenge to keep high-quality Marines, especially in the current economy and increasingly competitive civilian job market. This is particularly true for cyber and many of the high-tech occupations that are critical to the future of warfare. Incentive pay and bonuses remain vital to our retention effort, and we appreciate your continued support for them. We are open to new ways to recognize, reward, and retain high-quality Marines in the Corps. The Commandant's top priority in this regard is to increase lineal list flexibility for our officer promotions. We believe this is a simple yet effective way to recognize excellence. We look forward to working with all the services, the Department, and members of the subcommittee on other initiatives that will enhance personal quality, readiness, and lethality. We remain adaptable and open to new ways to recruit and retain the high-tech force we need for the future as we build on the foundation of quality Marines we have today. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Let me just begin that I'm very concerned, and I'd like each of you to address this, with the lowering of standards. In that I can remember I was in the Army, in the Marine Corps, and in the Army at the end of the draft where, you know, anybody, yeah, I guess you had to talk your way out of, of being in the Army. But I think that the problems, and there were a lot of disciplinary problems, morale problems, but they were actually across the board. It wasn't limited to the United States Army at that time. And when I look at the military today, when I meet these young men and women who serve in uniform today, they're extraordinary. I mean, we truly have talent. We have an elite force. So we have a smaller force than we've historically had, but it is an elite force. I'd rather have fewer numbers and high quality than big numbers and low quality. And so I know that there is that great temptation to meet numbers to lower standards. And so I want each of you to address that, starting with the United States Army.
Chairman, thank you for the question. I will tell you the Army leadership has been very clear to me and our recruiting command. It's quality over quantity. If we can't make the quality or quantity you've allowed us to assess this year for the end strength, it's my job to come back to you and tell you why we can't do it. But we will not sacrifice quality. A couple points. So your description of our soldiers is extraordinary. That's a really good word to describe who they are. They impress me and inspire me each and every day. As the Army's growing again, thanks to your work, what we did is we went back to look at the last time we grew in 2008, and we made some mistakes back in 2008, and we're not making those mistakes now. Back in 2008, we were focused more on quantity than quality. That's not happening now. On a personal level, sir, I entered the Army in the early 80s, and we had a lot of problems back in those days. And I love our Army, and I don't want to go back to those days. And I speak, I think, for the leadership and speak for the commanders across the force. They don't want to either. So we will remain focused on quality and quantity. If we have to sacrifice one, it'll be the quantity. Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir. I would echo what General Seamands said for the Army. We're not going to sacrifice quality. What we've done, though, is taken a good hard look at self-imposed policies that limit the spectrum of candidates that we look at. For example, we're engaging with our medical experts to make sure that our medical standards, the Navy's side of the medical standards, are up to date with societal norms, making sure that we're not negatively impacting fleet readiness. For example, someone that may have used medication for bronchitis, does that equate to having asthma type of things that at one point may have been medically disqualifying, those sorts of things. We've used the full latitude of the Title X authority that you've given us for age limits and opened it up for both officer programs where there's no physical limitations, such as, for example, pilots or nuclear programs where there's physiological concerns, but everywhere else we've opened them up to the full latitude, and on enlisted programs as well. And then we're looking at single parent policies as well, where you have an older single parent where they've demonstrated they can responsibly care for those children and could translate that into military service. So we've opened up our doors to those sorts of situations as well. And then the last part is our recruiting techniques. As we're entering our transformation, we've really shifted our recruiting techniques to more of a virtual basis. We still rely on our recruiters as sort of the boots on ground deal closers, but we're getting into new markets, places where we haven't been able to get our message through before. So we're getting that message through and getting the talent that we couldn't.
General Grosso.
Yes, sir. We have not found any real challenges in recruiting. We are recruiting the same quality that we've been able to recruit, and we've been able to meet our recruiting goals across the total force. But what we have done, to your point about growing end strength, ma'am, is we've laid in the end strength at a reasonable pace over the FIDEP so that we don't overtax both the recruiting and the training sources that make them airmen. And so we have put a little bit of resourcing. We've increased the number of recruiters. We've stabilized the marketing budget, because what you find in the past is as we've decreased, you see this huge sine wave in the marketing budget. And any marketer will tell you you've always got to be in the market. So we've stabilized the marketing budget. And much like the Navy, we're modernizing the way we find airmen as well, because you find that's a process that hasn't really had much of a process improvement. And so how do we find airmen that we don't find today using technology and better leveraging all of our resourcing capacity, making it less stovepiped?
Okay. General Rocco.
As I stated in my opening remarks, 99% are Tier 1. The number is actually 99.86% Tier 1 of the recruits. We recruit approximately 31,000 Marines into the Marine Corps this year. Out of that, only about 70% of them will serve past their first tour. And that's based on the personal requirements and based on the needs of the Marine Corps. When we talk about first-term enlistments, those first-term Marines that will only serve their first term that want to stay on and do a second tour, we're at 92.9% of those Marines that are coming into that want to stay in the Marine Corps. That's where we're at right now for retaining those Marines. And it's not a first in, first out. We actually have the ability to look at those Marines that want to stay in, have boards, and only retain the highest quality of those Marines, including second-term Marines that we're at 99.5% of those Marines that want to stay in that we retain. So we think we're in a good place. MCRC has done a lot to go out to the markets and expand beyond that to ensure that we hit markets that perhaps, folks that perhaps we haven't touched in the past.
Thank you. Ranking Member Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to defer and allow my colleague to ask the first set of questions, Ms. Songas.
Well, I thank the ranking member for deferring and thank the chairman and ranking member for holding this committee, this hearing. As you all have noted in your testimony, the volatile nature of today's security environment and the complexity of threats our country faces do require the military services to recruit from a talent pool that is as broad, as talented, and as diverse as possible. To underscore this point, a study cited by the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services, Jakowitz, found that only 29% of young people ages 18 to 23 are eligible to serve after adjustments are made for individuals who are disqualified based on standards for medical, physical health, weight, mental health, drug usage, conduct, aptitude, and who have dependents. And Admiral, you referenced you're looking at some of these filters, but nevertheless, of that eligible population, more than half are women. So after you apply all these filters, what you're left with is a much smaller group, just over half are women. However, less than 20% of today's active duty force is comprised of women. So this study, in my mind, makes clear that in an era where the eligible military recruiting population remains on the decline, it is more important now than ever that we recruit from the entire population and not overlook the opportunity that half of the eligible nation's talent pool would provide the services in order to be the best services in the world. So with that in mind, I'd like each of you to comment on what your service is doing to recruit and retrain women in the services. And we'll start with you, General.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the question. A couple things. One, for our recruiting command as well as for our source of commissionings for ROTC and West Point, we're reaching out to females to encourage them to come in. And what we've seen at ROTC as well as West Point is increase in female applications and females being accepted, which will help, as they come in the Army, improve. I think part of that is as we did the gender integration, it opened up all the specialties. The Army's enjoyed such success where we have an infantry company commander female in the 82nd Airborne Division. We have lieutenants. We just had our most recent 2 Ranger School graduates last week graduate from a very difficult course at Fort Benning. I think as we see those role models come out and successfully lead, and they're doing wonderful things in our formations, I think you'll see increased females across formations. Very, very excited about what the females are doing in the Army, and I think there's no limit to what they can do in the future. We're very excited.
I thank you for that. And as we're moving down the line, can you also include kind of how you're addressing your messaging so that as young women are watching what they see on TV, wherever, what they're doing, and how you're also addressing a culture that encourages retention? Because I know as we've served on this subcommittee, we've seen there are issues that are unique to women who seek to serve their country, but who often find barriers to lengthening out their term of service. So, but we'll start with you, Admiral.
Yes, ma'am. Just on in terms of where we are right now, last year's Naval Academy graduating class, 27% women. 6 of the top 10 graduates were women. Our enlisted accessions for the last 2 years have been 26 and 27% women. It's an operational imperative for the Navy to increase our numbers of women. So we are frankly targeting them in our recruiting efforts, in our messaging, because that's where the talent is. 52% of technical graduates at America's colleges are women. That's where the talent is. So we are very aggressively going after them. Our new ad campaigns prominently feature women. Our most recent one has a female submariner earning her dolphins at the front of it. The first one that was released at the Army-Navy game in December, the first one of our new ad campaign, has a female sailor saluting at the end of it. So we're really trying to highlight situations that women could see themselves as a career in the Navy. The retention efforts, things like the Career Intermission Program, Navy's the biggest user of that. We highlight that. But the other element of this, as part of Sailor 2025, one of the pillars of that is career readiness, and one of the initiatives under there is to make the Navy a place where you can have life-work balance. We want sailors to have a longer career, and we want them to be able to achieve life-work balance, to do things like occasionally put family matters in perspective and not have to pay a penalty for your career. That applies to men and women, and Navy has a little bit of a problem with occasionally doing that for both men and women. So we're working hard to do that if we're going to expect people to have a longer career. We need them to have longer careers so we can bring fewer sailors in the front door and get a higher return on investment from those sailors.
Admiral, I'm out of time, but General Grosso and General Rocco, if you could submit an answer, a written answer, I'd appreciate it.
Why don't you go ahead and take another minute?
Okay, go ahead. Then let's move down the line here.
Representative Nsongas, I would say it starts with the messaging. And I'm going to steal the words from our secretary, but if you ask any person in the population who was their first protector and defender, it was their mother. And so we have to change the messaging that there is a place for women. And I think we also have to have women out see that women can be successful. I feel like it's my personal responsibility to go to events so women can see that you can progress and there is a place for you. I think our recruiting efforts, as well as we get rid of those stovepipes, as people come to talk to us, there's so many opportunities: full-time, part-time, guard, reserve, civilian even. I went to an event and I had a woman tell me she didn't like sweating. I said 25% of our force are civilians. Would you like to come be a civilian? So I think that's the recruiting side. On the retention side, Rand just finished a study for us, and there are definitely some systemic things we need to do. Childcare was a big one of them, and so. And I don't think that's just a women's issue, but if families can't take care of their children, we're not going to retain them. The other thing that was very clear from women is and this was literally in the study, they want to get off the escalator. And so we have to have some way to figure out DOTMA reform, whether it's technical tracks, so that they can be more technical. And they also asked for maybe opportunities to cross-train into career fields that may be more suitable to having a family. So there's some systemic work that we are looking at as well.
Thank you, Jim.
That's an important question, and thank you, Representative Nsongas. So the Marine Corps, as you know, we've opened up all occupational fields now and are represented throughout the Marine Corps. That's one issue. Second, from the Marine Corps Recruiting Command, we have gone places that we haven't gone in the past. Mail-outs now go to both male, female, athletics, coaches. We've opened up programs to basically have access to both at the high school level and the collegiate level to athletics, both on the male and female side. We run education and coach workshops so we can have access, so the Marine Corps recruiters can have access to a population that we in the past have not had an access to. And of course, our advertising campaign has focused on not only diversity but females, and we've been more aggressive in displaying a diverse Marine Corps. Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony, and I appreciate your work. I mean, there's much to be done, but we want to have the best services possible, so we need to recruit fully from all that this country offers.
Dr. Abraham, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses for being here. General Grosso, I'll start with you. We all understand that when a pilot gets through with the Air Force training specifically, that 10-year commitment, that the civilian side is at that day dangling a check sometimes 3 and 4 times more than what they're getting paid for the Air Force. And fortunate or unfortunate, we understand that's the reality. And I understand all the services are in shortage of aviators. It's my understanding that the Air Force is probably more in a shortage area because they employ more aviators, just logistically. So the question is, specifically, what is the Air Force doing to retain that aviator where he or she has invested, and the Air Force has invested so much time and treasure, and then all of a sudden, poof, the next day, they're flying for a Delta or a Southwest?
So we have several lines of effort to retain aviators. But what we find is that this is very cyclical, and if you look at the data, it is highly correlated to airline hiring. And so it is incumbent upon us to do all we can to retain airmen. And so some of it is how do we give them a better quality of work? And it's very clear that there's duties we need to take off their plate, and we are working that. We funded that in the budget. So administrative duties that take away from their ability to fly. We have to fund weapon system sustainment and maintainers so that those planes are ready for them to fly more. And we need to give them more flexibility in our systems. We are working hard from an assignments perspective to get more input from the airmen, from our aviators, and so maybe have less disruption from assignments. We are also looking at ways to incentivize long deployments away from their family so that we lose less people because it doesn't meet their family needs. But we've also understood that we can't retain our way out of this challenge. So you have to produce more, and we have to take a hard look at the requirements as well.
So in that line, you mentioned your college intern program.
Yes, sir.
As a pipeline for maybe more aviators coming in. I guess my question is, are you getting much resistance across the college spectrum of that type of intern program being on those campuses?
So just to be clear, that intern program is for civilians, so not our military aviators. But
I understand that, but you're on college campuses touting this. Am I correct there, trying to bring those students into the armed services?
Yes or no, we've actually had great success. What you find on the civilian side is it takes us so long to hire, we don't keep them. And so the authorities Congress gave us to directly hire them and offer them jobs in their junior year is really the way we're competing for talent, in particular STEM talent.
Because I know you've got to pick them up early in their curriculum, either the sophomore or no later than the junior, because if not, a civilian contractor or business is going to be already tugging and putting a check in front of them.
Exactly. And that's why the authorities you gave us are critical, and then us being able to execute those authorities.
Okay. And Admiral Burke, I know on the Navy side, but in all the services, cyber shortage is an issue, and I think cyber and certainly space is our next domain of fighting. Specifically for the Navy on cyber, what are you guys doing to hold on to those people? I mean, that's somewhat of a different culture as far as the cyber mindset is in my world. That takes a little kind of an outside-the-box thinking, so that's sometimes of a different personality. Any comments on that?
Yes, sir. Our big challenges are on the senior enlisted technical leaders, and one of so they'll grow to sort of the E5, E6 level, and then they'll be poached off by commercial, entities right when they're maturing to the point where they're going to be eligible for maybe one of our warrant officer programs at the E6 or E7 level, where there would be a technical manager for us. So one of the things we just employed was instead of a commissioned warrant officer, we went with a W1 program that made E5s eligible for this. That was within our existing service authorities to use that option. That made junior E5s eligible, and then made them, available for that program for many, many more years. So that opened the pool to many more sailors. We have to be a little more careful about screening those sailors, looking harder for the potential, but we know how to do that pretty well. And then we get them into the leadership position, and then they can blossom from there. So we've just implemented that. That's getting off the ground. Too early to tell if that will succeed, but we'll at least get 3 to 4 years out of them once they get into the warrant officer program. So that'll buy some time out of it. The other area that we're a little bit of a challenge in is we've got on the officer side, Our operators, both on the offensive and defensive side, we're doing okay on there. It's the engineers, the folks that are developing the payload packages, if you will. We grow those right now. You gave us some legislative authority to bring them in with equivalent of 3 years of experience laterally. That's about a lieutenant junior grade in the Navy or a first lieutenant in the other services, but it's about a $50,000 pay. In Silicon Valley, these folks would be, up over $100,000. So lateraling them in. The mission and the service appeals to these folks, but there's an equivalent accepted cyber civilian program that allows the government to pay in the closer to $100,000 range. So they seem to be preferentially going to the government service rather than a military service option. So that's an area we're having a challenge in. So we're still growing them from the ground up rather than bringing them in at the level. But retention is where it is right now. Yes, sir.
Thank you. And thank you for the extra time, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here and for your service. I think you've heard loud and clear that we're not interested in seeing lower quality. Even though you have a great challenge ahead of you, we want to be part of making sure you can meet the challenge. So as I'm listening to you, I'm realizing, I wonder to what extent our efforts in terms of recruiting and looking at personnel issues are relative to our, fathers or grandfathers' military service. I think Vice Admiral Burke mentioned looking at disqualifiers. So what I would like each of you to provide to the committee is what the disqualifiers are for all those who actually do apply or who become recruited. You may not have those figures for us now or those specifics, so if you would just provide that to us, that would be appreciated. Secondly, in talking to those who actually were purveyors of MREs recently that had a presentation for us, and they were showing us how they were beefing up the calcium in some of their products. I was told that there is about 10% of those who are recruited during basic training that wash out. So I'd like to know from each of you if that's the case. And they wash out because of hairline fractures. So could you each address that particular issue for me, please?
Thank you very much for the question, ma'am. Within the Army, about 10% wash out during basic training for a variety of reasons, including medical issues. And we're taking a look at that. Within the active force, across the total force, about 80% of our non-deployables are medically related, and musculoskeletal is one of the biggest portions of that population.
So if you could provide the specifics on the non-deployables of that 8% and then the 10%, how many of them fall into that muscular skeletal? Yes, Vice Admiral?
Yes, ma'am. We have about 12% attrition at Recruit Training Command. The overwhelming majority of that, 95% of that is non-disclosed pre-existing medical conditions, things that weren't disclosed in the recruiting process.
Oh, is that the use of an inhaler?
Well, those are the things we're trying to change the policy on, but it's things, and when we come across those, we change it right then and there. But it's things that are, no kidding, insurmountable medical things that we can't get through. So we're actually working through some Privacy Act issues with, for example, being able to look at the medical records of dependent children of military members and look at public military records, so you're not completely dependent on what individuals write and tell you about. The ability to actually be able to go look in medical systems and see these things ahead of time. And we're making some progress working with the Department of Defense on that.
Lieutenant General?
Representative, I have not seen the current data, but I believe it's about 6 to 7%, but I will get you the exact number. Having been the commander there several years ago, we didn't typically separate somebody if they had a stress fracture. We tried to rehabilitate them because depending on the severity, it usually could be 2, 3, or 4 weeks out of training. So we didn't typically send them home for stress fractures, but I will get you that exact data.
In the Marine Corps, our non-EAS attrition at boot camp is closer to 20%. Most of it is, as Admiral Burke had mentioned, non-disclosed issues, because a lot of the medical is self-reporting. But I can give you the specifics on the breakdown of what exactly that number is. As we get beyond boot camp, our non-EAS attrition goes down to about 3%.
Okay. One of the things that was recommended is that the calcium is beefed up before they come into basic training to avoid some of those issues, and I don't know to what extent that's attempted through recruiting. How about retention after their first term? What is the percentage that you're able to retain? Could each of you tell us that, please?
Ma'am, about a third of the people who enlist don't make it to their initial reenlistment window for a variety of reasons, either separation or medical issues within the Army.
Well, how many actually could continue, could re-up, but don't, is what I want to know.
Well, on the retention, we have about over 80% of our eligible population to re-enlist are re-enlisting and staying in uniform in the Army.
Okay, thank you.
We're averaging Navy-wide around 60%.
So our first term retention is 60%. But we do, for various reasons, lose about a third. So if you looked at who started basic training and who gets to that first term, it's about a third that aren't there. And
for the Marine Corps, we, by design, lose about 70% of that cohort, or those recruits in that year. When I say lose, those Marines. We don't need. We need but about a third of them to stay into the Marine Corps, to re-up for a second enlistment. So by design, by rank structure, most of that, 70% of those recruits in that given year do the first term enlistment and then leave. Some voluntary and some we just don't have the space for. As I mentioned in my remarks, we're at retaining FTAP, we're at 92%. And we have more Marines right now who want to stay in than we have boat spaces for.
All right, thank you very much.
Dr. Winstrup, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you all today. Ms. Spear, there's a part of me that would like to be sitting over there today as an Army podiatrist to talk about treatment and prevention of stress fractures and injuries that we could do a whole lot more on, and I'll be glad to engage with you more on that. We might need a whole other hearing on that, and I'd be glad to do that. And it's more than just adding calcium, but because it's biomechanical. But I'll just address to you, General Seamands, if you don't mind, for the sake of time, but I want to go through the recruiting process. When someone wants to join, they go through the process, they've checked all the boxes as being eligible. The recruiter then and I'm thinking we're enlisted at this point, young people. What MOS do you want? What is it you want to do in the military? I was so impressed when I deployed that 90% of our enlisted that were eligible for re-enlistment, while we were in theater, took that. I don't know if that's the case across the board, but it was pretty impressive, especially when you consider where they're making that decision, which was in theater. And so what occurs to me, and I've asked people, you know, when they joined and they met with the recruiter, did the recruiter say, yeah, what do you want to do in the Army, but what do you want to do after? Whether it's 20 years plus or 4 years, are we investing the way we should in their success? In other words, what does success look like to us? Yeah, it's successful if someone re-enlists, you know, we've got some retention, that's successful, and that's one of the career paths we should be talking about. But are we talking about what is your long-term success? Because when you talk about marketing, when you talk about recruiting, if the military is perceived as the place to go because there's going to be something good at the end, whether it's in uniform or not, I think we'll recruit and retain even better. So what I'd like to hear from all of you on that. We'll start with you on that notion of day one. What do you want to do after this?
Thank you, sir. That's actually part of the discussion recruiters have. These are the MOSs you qualify for. what's your passion, what do you aspire for, and in some cases talk about life after the Army. We also start that discussion when they arrive at basic training in the IT, and it continues on through the time they're in uniform. Thanks to the VOW Act that you passed a few years ago, it's a conscious decision. And you can see the effect of that from commanders, command sergeant majors, and first sergeants engaging. If you go back about 5 years, our unemployment compensation was almost $500 million we were paying. Last year's $127 million. So what's happening is our Soldier for Life programs, our education, training, and credentialing that we work through the programs, tuition assistance, in order to return a better citizen back to their community is evidenced in the lower unemployment. So that's a discussion we have throughout there because it's once they come in, we want to make sure they're set up for a smooth takeoff as they leave.
Yes, sir. Similar, when our sailors come in, we tested for aptitude, of course, as all the services do. We also have a test that it's called JOIN, Job Opportunities in the Navy, that tests their interests. And we found a high correlation between, sort of the sweet spot between the two is about a 75% match between the two, and that gives us a much higher retention. You know, if you're good at it and you like it, and not necessarily the peak of both, you'll stay because you're challenged in something for a lot longer period of time. But in addition to all the many educational opportunities that we offer to, you know, improve oneself, to help you later on in life, either inside the military or outside the military, the certification, Navy certification opportunities online. We have over 1,900 credentialing opportunities. There's at least one credentialing opportunity for the job skills. Every single sailor could get at least one credentialing opportunity, and that's to, you know, show that they've been tested to industry standards. And then the U.S. Military Apprenticeship Program gives them the experiential documentation as well. So we'll provide those things all to help them be, you know, better citizens, more productive employment opportunity when they get out.
Thank you.
I think ours is very similar as well. We do aptitude testing, and for the most part, most airmen that come in have a skill that they know what they want to do, and they typically get that skill. It's not that common unless they don't qualify. And then military tuition assistance really helps set them up for the future. And typically what you'll find is that they study something they want to do when they leave. We have an interestingly large number of people that study early education, early childhood education, and we believe that must be because that's something that they choose to do beyond their service. The other thing is we have an accredited associates program in the Air Force, a community college of the Air Force. So very few, if any, enlisted members leave without at least their associate's degree.
So knowing full well that we are going to return 70% of those enlistees after their first enlistment, we spend a lot of time focusing on exactly that. We want to return good citizens back to after they serve in the Marine Corps. So we encourage tuition assistance. We encourage the use of the GI Bill while on active duty to go ahead and pursue some further education. MECEP, ESEP, those enlisted commissioning programs that we have, we fully endorse. And in our transition courses, they're full with job fairs and credentialing organizations that will help those Marines take the skills that they've learned in the Marine Corps and transition them to a civilian job.
Yeah, I think just all too often the general public doesn't realize. You hear about anyone who has a difficulty after their service, but we don't hear enough about the military being a pathway to a successful civilian life. And I think that's really what I'd like to see promoted more and change the perception that some people have. Because I think we all know the great majority of people who serve end up in a better place. I yield back.
Mr. Russell, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. One of the things that we're exploring in this year's authorization is the ability to train, and this one will be a kind of an officer training related question. You have people maybe with a 4-year scholarship program or they're at the service academies, and then for whatever reason, this is not a high population, but it is a high investment. They have some injury that will preclude a commissioning. And in talking to the vices and others, it's like through no fault of their own, they're not punished, but then they're released to the American public as a whole. Yes, you know, maybe better citizens and all of that, but all the investment is gone. And so one of the things that we're looking at maybe exploring is to translate them, if they are precluded from taking a commission, to go into the Department of Defense workforce and fulfill their service obligation in that direction. And I would just be curious of your thoughts on that.
Sir, if I could comment first. We are already doing that. We've had several academy cadets, to your very example, that had a medical issue pop up literally weeks before graduation. And with your direct hiring authorities, we brought them into the civilian workforce.
But that was voluntary, is it not? I mean, under the current law?
Yes, sir, it is not. It is absolutely voluntary.
Right, because if they were healthy, they would have a service obligation, and they would be required to serve. It's still 5-year commitment, I guess, for service academies, 4-year for 4-year scholarship commissionings. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you see, and that's great, you know, that we're doing that. If we made that a requirement, I mean, it's not unjust. There's been a great investment there, and I would love to have your thoughts on that.
Sir, I support that. I think it's a great opportunity. They have a propensity to serve. In many cases, they want to serve, and I think we've given them a great education, so I think that's an appropriate payback.
Yes, sir. We would support it as well. Like the Air Force, we seek volunteers to come into the government service. We do the same thing when there's been an injury for like medical scholarships. We actively try to, you know, rather than recoup, get them to come in as a civilian doctor, for example. So, and there's always quite a high interest rate in taking those options, but we would support making it mandatory.
We would support it, sir.
And the Marine Corps would also support. I think it's a wonderful. You talk about the quality of the men and women that go to the service academies, and as you say, no fault of their own, they cannot serve. Exposing them to a Department of Defense job that they perhaps wouldn't have been exposed to, I think opens up both benefits to both the student and also the organization.
Well, look for it heading your way, I guess, and you know, it's something that will continue to work, Mr. Chairman, and it's something that we're looking at for this year's NDAA. But I really appreciate your thoughts on it, and it's valuable to have your comments on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
We will have a second quick round. Representative, Ranking Member Spear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Lieutenant General Grosso actually referenced having a high retention rate, but low retention in terms of linguistic analysts, special operation aircraft maintenance, and nuclear medicine specialties. I'd like to know if you have categorized the areas where you have problems in terms of retention. I think that's part of the key here. If we invest as much money as we do to get them through boot camp and have them serve for a period of 18 months afterwards, or 2 years afterwards, and then have them not continue, I mean, that's a loss of what, $80,000. So could you tell me what are the areas in each of your services where you have issues with retention?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. Within the Army, I think with all the other services, aviation is one of them, and we're attacking that with increased training throughput as well as bonuses to encourage people to continue to serve. The other area I would offer is cyber. We don't have a problem assessing them because there are a lot of people who are interested in being cyber soldiers. We think we're at some point in the future, because they have a 6-year obligation, we'll have a problem with retention. So our strategy is to treat them and recognize what they're doing now in terms of bonuses and their credentialing in order to hopefully have them continue to serve and want to continue to serve in the future. But I would say aviation and cyber are the two issues.
Yes, ma'am. For us, it's the nuclear specialties, nuclear propulsion, that is, cyber, including linguistics, same as the Air Force, aviation, mechanical, and structural rates on the enlisted side, pilots, of course, retention on the officer side, and then the special warfare folks.
And ma'am, you mentioned ours, but we track every single career field extensively, because we don't need to, in an up-or-out system, you only retain what you need. And so for the most part, if you look in the aggregate, we've got very strong retention. We've just got these pockets, but you've given us plenty of authority in special and incentive pays. And really the key for us is to target them where we need them.
All right.
Yes, ma'am. So cyber is always a challenge. Part of the challenge we're having with cyber is that the other MOSs, the other specialties that we're drawing upon, are usually signals intelligence, are those the schools that the Marines go and spend a lot of time at, so they're in high demand. The other one, aviation, we mentioned aviation maintenance. We've included aviation, what we call bonuses for the enlisted side. So those Marines that work on aircraft, those specialties, and they have certain specialties inside of those CDIs and different aviation specialties, we've given them extra bonuses, which has stabilized the population.
Lieutenant General, Congresswoman Tsongas made the case that targeting women is going to be key moving forward in the military. You know, it takes me back to the 40 years when I was a staffer and went to West Point and asked the audacious question as to why women couldn't be accepted in the academies, and we've actually moved forward a little bit since then. But at the time, it was because they couldn't serve in combat. That was the rationale. So there really is no rationale anymore, but it appears the Marines have really lagged behind all the other services in terms of incorporating women, both in terms of training, they're still being trained separately from men, and just the general sense that women don't belong in the Marines. So could you address how you're going to be more embracive of women, much like the other services have?
And that's an important,
in 1 minute.
And certainly, that's an important question. So we recently opened up Marine Combat Training West, which is where we send all non-infantry Marines. So if you're an administrator or just a non-infantry, you will go to Marine Corps Combat Training to learn how to be a Marine first. So we've recently opened up that to females. As far as everything else, we've opened up all occupational fields. So again, it is voluntary to go into some of these more ground-centric, load-bearing units, but we understand that we are making progress, albeit slow, but we are making progress. We've stood up the Personnel Studies Office, which is headed by Ms. Melissa Cohen, to go out and ensure that commanders are trained and units are trained on unconscious bias and some of the things that perhaps has prevented some of that in the past. So we're taking proactive steps to ensure that women are accepted in every MOS and in every level of the Marine Corps.
How many generals do you have that are women?
We have two, General Reynolds, General Shea, and we just recently General Maylock, so it'll be three.
3 out of how many?
82 active.
All right, thank you.
General Bacon, you're now recognized.
Okay. Thank you. It's hard to do 2 committee hearings and a speech, so I'm glad I caught you on the tail end of this. Thank you for being here, and it's good to be with some friends I've served with. And I appreciate your expertise and your leadership. I want to ask you, what is the impact so far that you've seen on the blended retirement? Are we seeing any kind of negative, adverse retention from that or recruitment? Thank you.
Well, thanks for asking. We monitor that pretty closely. So far, about 9% of the active, about 3% of the Guard and Reserve have opted into the blended retirement. I think it's going to be a significant indicator on retention in the out years, and I think we're going to have to fundamentally change how we address retaining talent. Today, if I keep somebody, an officer, an NCO, to 10 years, I have a pretty high probability I'll keep them until 20. I think that dynamic could potentially change, but we won't see that probably for the next 7, maybe to 10 years, so we need to be prepared, and we're thinking about it now, trying to get our heads around it.
I think you're right. My hunch is people are going to get out the 17-year point because they won't have that big cliff they're facing.
Absolutely. So the blended retirement essentially reduces the cost of the impact of getting out potentially. And so I think we need to be creative in how we address that and work to retain our talent.
Sir, we're not seeing any impacts yet, but we continue to watch it closely as well. We really appreciate the flexibility you gave us in last year's NDAA to move the continuation pay component. It gave us some years to move it around. So our plan is to sort of use that and complement that with other retention incentives to offset.
Thank you.
I don't think we have enough data yet. So we know the data in the aggregate. We don't know what skill sets there are, so I'm very curious to see that data. But I agree that it does fundamentally change. It's a big change, and how we manage that continuation pay is going to be critical.
Okay.
And I'll just pile on, the continuation pay is going to be key. Right now we have 25% of the Marine Corps has chosen, and out of that, 70% have opted into BRS.
So I'm hearing is some positive indicators, but yet it's still too early to really say, and yet there's a fear that we're going to have a hard time retaining people through 20. So that's sort of how I have analyzed your all's inputs. Something that I've mentioned to Colonel Grosso, or General Grosso, I'm sorry, you were Lieutenant Colonel. One star all the way up. General Grosso, excuse me, is the pilot bonuses. I think we need to have the data at some point. If, say, 55% of our pilots stay in, I'm just throwing a number out there, we say that's a success for the bonuses. But yet we don't know if there wasn't, if, say, 50% of that 55 would have still signed up. And I think at some point we need to have some kind of data that says that these bonuses are having this kind of impact. And something I've mentioned before, but I know we always look at the retention that we have, but we don't know how many we would have retained anyway without the bonus. So your thoughts?
Yes, sir. There's clearly economic rent, which is what you're discussing, and I think that's very hard to know. But the one thing that it does is it locks the person in,
Yeah.
so it helps us. It helps us know what we do keep. But I completely agree with you. It's an imprecise tool.
Okay.
We actually have some other options coming your way that we're just finally socializing.
And I agree the commitment things is important, so I won't disparage that part. I just, it'd be nice to know if we're getting a 5% payoff added or 10, or I think it would be helpful to be able to substantiate just what the impact really is, and I don't think we know. And finally, I just want to, I know the Air Force I've been hearing a little bit about it, but I don't know if anybody else is doing this too, but enlisted aviators. Could you give us an update how we're doing there?
It's going very well. So that it's clear that our enlisted airmen are just as talented, and they're doing well going through the course. I think we're just starting to implement them in the operational units. So I think that piece, we're just starting the cultural piece and how do we get that right, but it's clear that they're successful.
So far only in remote piloted aircraft?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so nothing else. Any of the other services?
So most of our aviators are warrant officers.
Warrant officers, right.
Many of them came from the enlisted force.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Russell? Thank you. I just want to close with one issue that I want to mention to you, and that is I've seen this for a very long time, where in the MEPS process, somebody's deemed physically qualified. We pay to send them to basic training in their respective branch of service, where they're given another physical and they're deemed unqualified. Now, then, that's a waste of money and time. And I don't know if it's just a false feeling of warmth to try and get the numbers up initially or what it is, but it ought to be the same standard. There shouldn't be a disparity. And I can't, I saw it when I was in the military, but I also saw it, but I also see it today when a family calls me and says, my son just reported, the last example was Navy recruit training, and of course they're in limbo as they're trying to be administratively processed out. And so we need to get this straight, and there needs to be one standard, and it needs to be consistent. And so I wish to thank the witnesses for their enlightening testimony this afternoon. There being no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned.